So there are many events on focus, on blur, on key press, on key down, on key up, on submit, on reset, on select, on change. All this are intrinsic event handling in HTML, and we use this event to call to JavaScript code. Okay. So if we want to modify the style of an element in our HTML document, how we can modify this style? There are two steps to modify style of an element. The first one is we must select this element. So what is the instruction in JavaScript that selects our element? How we can select an element, an HTML element? For example, we have this is our code, our HTML code, and we want to select this element, all this element. So how we can select this element? There are two steps. In the first one, we want to select this element, and in the second one, we want to modify the style of this element. So the question is how we can select this element. Yes, we must add an ID to this element. For example, the ID here ID equal X. This is an example. And after that, how we can select P, the tag P with ID equal X. Sorry. We use document. So the instruction to select this element is yes. Good. We use window var element like this. Window.document.get element by ID, and here we write the name. It will be X. So the element in our example is P with ID equal X. It's clear. After that, if we want to modify the style of this element, for example, we want to modify the background color of this element. How we can modify this background color? The background color of P. This is a JavaScript. Just we use DOM as APA. So chapter 4 and chapter 5 JavaScript. All this chapter talk about JavaScript. Just in chapter 5 we will use DOM. Sorry. Good. So the first one, not X but element, Mr. Rضوان, element dot, because here it's element not X. element dot style dot background color equal, for example, gray. Yes. Good. The second one is, there is a second manner. In this example, X replace var in the beginning. No, not var. So X here is our ID. Just a moment. So here we have many tags, okay, Ahmed? We have many tags. And just I will change the stroke of my pen. For example, P here, I add in P ID equal Y. And in this input, for example, ID equal W. So if I want to select this P, this element in green, this P, all this P. So I write window dot document dot get element by ID of Y. So this method return an element. I can store this element as variable Ahmed. So Ahmed is our element. After that I write Ahmed dot style dot background equal gray, for example. So Ahmed represents all this element and Y represents the ID of this element. So Y represents the ID of this element. If I want to select the input, this element input, so I can write var element x, y, any name of variable equal window dot document dot get element by ID of W. So I use the ID to select a specific element, and after that to modify this element there are two manners. The first one is like this: element dot style, after that dot background, element dot style dot background. And the second manner is using the method setProperty. So element yes dot style yes dot setProperty, and here we keep the same name of the property in CSS. So in CSS the property is background minus color. So if we use setProperty, the method setProperty, we keep the same name of the property in CSS, background minus. Here there is a minus. If we use the previous manner, in this case we write background color without minus, so the minus will be eliminated, and here capital C, background color. It's clear how we can modify the style element, the style of an element in HTML document using JavaScript and DOM. Any question? So if we want to get this style, we can write element.style to get the style, or element.style.getProperty. So to get style, so for example, to verify if the style is of the background equal gray, this instruction is equivalent to this one. Return the color of the background. So here, if we use style, in this case background color, because we use style, and if we use getProperty value, in this case we use background minus color with minus color. Any questions? Okay. So let's move now to how we can access and modify our HTML document. So get element by ID is used, so we can write document.getElement by ID nav. That means we will select all the tag with ID nav. In our case is the tag UL. We can also use get element by tag name, in our case LI. So X, in this case X is, what is X? X represents, yes, good, is an array. X is an array. So if we write X1, X1 is this one, not home. X1 is the second. Home is X0. Okay. After that, previous sibling, that means the previous one. So the previous previous sibling, that means the tag that is previous to our element. And next sibling is the tag after our element. Next sibling. And the previous sibling. So if we want to select the element before the current element, we use the previous sibling. If we want to select the element after the current element, we use next sibling. We can also use parent node. So the parent node of our element, our Li, is UL. So UL represents parent node. We can use child nodes. So if our element is X, this is our element, and all Li represents child nodes. We can use first child. We can modify the value of a node. We can also modify an attribute of an element. So if we have an element, to modify the attribute of this element, we use a method. What is the method used to modify an attribute of an element? Good. Set attribute is the method used to modify an element. For example, here in our example, this is X. So X is this one, is the anchor. This is X. So if we write x.set attribute href photo.php, that means the value of the attribute href, this attribute, will be modified to photos.php. So this value, it will be modified to photo.php. Okay. We can also modify the attribute here. If the attribute exists, like href. So href in our example is photo.html. It exists. Okay, so if the attribute exists, the new value override the photo.php override photo.html. So the value of our attribute will be updated. It's clear? But if the value does not exist, so in this case, x.set attribute create the attribute target here. Okay, it's clear the difference between href and target. And the first one, href exists, so the value will be updated. Okay. Our X is this tag. This tag represents our X. Okay. So what are the attributes in our element here? What are the attributes in X? We have only one attribute. The attribute is, yes, href. So if we write X dot set attribute href, after that www, for example. So in this case, the value of photo.html will be www. So the value, this value, update. So the value of href will be updated by www. It's clear? Okay. But if we write X dot set attribute, for example, class ABC. So we have an attribute class, yes or no, in this example? Okay, no, we don't have an attribute class. In this case, X.set attribute add a new attribute class with the value ABC. Okay, it's clear now? Okay. If exist, update. If not, add. Yes, good. So we can also create a new element. So when we write document.createElement.li, that means P, this P will be li and li. Okay, and if we write o.append_child P, this is our O. Append child P, that means this li will be added to our element as a child in the last position. So with DOM we can create a new element and we can add this element to our HTML document. Any question about this slide? Okay. We can also remove an element. So remove a child will remove an element. So we select the element and after that we can remove this element. So this is an example of adding notes in a document tree. So we want to add, this is our body. In the body we have OL and LI tags, and we have P tags. We have OL. So OL is the tag to represent ordered list or unordered list. Good. and P to represent a paragraph. So in this example, we want to add here, we want to add a new element, and this element, it will be added using DOM. So this is the element to add it. In this element we find div, we find also button tags, and the button we have type as an attribute and click as an attribute, etc. So this is an example to add this button using DOM. So in this example, we will use create element and create text node to node creation. For example, document.create element div to create the element div, document.create element button to create the tag button, etc. We also, to add this elements to our DOM tree, we use insert before, we use append child as a method to add this element to our tree. And to modify or to add the attributes to the created elements, we use the method set attribute. So the method set attribute is used to create these elements. We can modify the text of this element. Also, there is another manner to create this element. So we just prepare a div with id equal x. Here we have a div. To select this element, we use this instruction window.document.getElement by idx. After that, we can use inner HTML. So when we write element.inner HTML equal this code, so all this code will be inserted here between div and div. So we can use inner HTML to modify the content of a tag. So for example, if I write element dot inner HTML equal xxx, so here we will find dev id equal x, after that xxx and div. So the xxx will be added or inserted. This value will be inserted here by using inner HTML. So inner HTML add the value of xxx in the element. It's clear? Any questions? So to add an element, we can use create element, append child, insert before, or we can use also inner HTML. DOM event handling. So JavaScript event listener is a function that is called with event instance when a certain event occurs. So an event listener is associated with the target element by calling add event listener on the element. So this is an example. When we write this instruction, can you explain me this instruction? What is the means of var button equal window dot document dot get element by ID MSG button? What is the meaning of this instruction? Can you explain me the meaning of this instruction? Yes, that means I will select the tag. So in this case, I write button, var button, but I can write var x, var y. So when we write window.document.getElement by ID MSJ button, that means I will select the tag with ID MSJ button. And after that, when we write button.add event listener click say hello false, that means when I click in this element, I must execute the function say hello. It's clear? Good. So button is event target, click is event type, and there are some types of the events. All HTML intrinsic events except key press, key down, key up, and double click. Also has some others that are typically targeted as the window object, like error, size, scroll, etc. Let's move now. Yes, pop-up message. So here the result is a pop-up message. This message is the result of the click. Let's move now to DOM event propagation. So the target of an event is the lowest level element associated. Lowest level element associated with event. Example target is the A element if the link is clicked. So in our case, the target is the A element if the link is clicked. However, event listener associated with ancestors of the target may also be called. So in this case, there are three types of event listener. Three types. The first one is capturing. So listener on ancestor created with true as third tag. So capturing, that means the listener on ancestor that add event listener click, after that listener 1, and here in the third value we must write true. True, that means the type of this event is capturing. The second one is target. So listener on target element. The third one is bubbling. So listener on ancestor created with false as third argument. So keep in mind that there is a three type of event listener: capturing, target, and uh, capturing target and bubbling. DOM event cancellation. So the browser provides default event listener for certain elements and events. Example, click on hyperlink, click on submit button, etc. So default listeners are called after all user specified listeners, and stop propagation does not affect default listener. Instead, call prevent default on event instance to cancel default event handling. So if we want to cancel default event handling, we can use prevent default. So we call this method prevent default to cancel the default event handling. So for DOM form validation, we can use regular expression to validate the input of our form. After that, several elements provide methods for generating events. For example, text field.select causes text in text field to be selected and a select event to occur. So for example, blur, anchor input, select text area, click, input type button, checkbox, radio, reset, submit. For the method focus, anchor input, select text area. For the method select, we can find input and input type text, type file, type password, and text area. So detecting host objects, how can a JavaScript program test for the existence of a certain host object? Does the style element have a set property method? For example, if element.style.set property of if element and element.style and element.style.set property. And there are other common host objects like alert, confirm, prompt, or open, close, focus, blur, etc. So there are many common host objects. Just I will save the participant list. Okay, for the attendance. Any questions? Yes, for the midterm exam from chapter 1 to this chapter, to chapter 5. The next chapter is not in the midterm exam.